Hello and welcome. You're watching Spotlight on Press TV. Now, since he took office 6 years ago, the French President Emmanuel Macron has hardly had a moment of plain sailing. First came the Yellow Vests, whose often violent protests against taxes and economic inequality rocked France for months. Then the global pandemic, followed by the Ukraine war. Yet Macron has never been in as much trouble as in recent days. His decision on March 16th to force through a widely unpopular pension reform bill without a final vote by the National Assembly or the Parliament sparked one of the most serious crises in the history of France. In this edition of Spotlight, we will take a look at how these challenges have been testing the French government's commitment to human rights and how, to save his pension reform bill, Macron has lost France. To discuss that, we are joined by Moustafa Traore, academic and political commentator who's joining us from Paris, and Don Debar, activist and commentator, joining us live from New York. Thank you very much to both of you, gentlemen. Let's begin with Mr. Traore. Now, over the last week in particular, we've seen protests breaking out almost every day, more than 1 million people taking part in these protests, and still Macron is insisting on following through with this pensions reform. Why is that?
I think there are different reasons to explain his position and his decision. He's now in his second mandate, so he knows that he won't be elected anymore. So this is his last years as the French president, and he's got his political views, his political plans, and now is the best moment for him to put into practice, to implement all the laws, all the decisions he wants for France. Of course, many people are disappointed. Many people do not approve of the reform, especially because with this reform, the pension, the retirement age is going to be pushed to 64 instead of 62. And so it means 2 more years. And this is, of course, for when you started work at a very young age. But for those who started quite late, those who, for example, went to university and entered the working life quite late, for them is going to be 67. So he knows that now is the moment, and this is why he used this thing which is part of the French Constitution, the 49.3. So it is thanks to the 49.3, so which means that there were no debate. There was no debate in Parliament. They did not vote. The MPs, the French MPs, did not vote. And he just passed the law. And he is doing and putting into place the policies of those who elected him. Those who elected him, those who put him in power. This is my opinion.
Well, thank you very much for that. Here, let's bring in Mr. Don Debar from New York. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Now, 2/3 of the French oppose this law, and the approval rating of Macron is now at around 28%. It's really a dismal popularity rate, actually. And of course, France is one of those countries that prides itself as a role model of democracy. Democracy, as we say, the government of the people, by the people, for the people. And it seems that Macron is not even listening to these people.
Well, it's been interesting listening to Macron speak now after listening to him lecture Iran and places all over the world on how to treat protesters. And we're hearing, I don't know what the reports are on the ground, but from there, but I'm hearing from news agencies and people that I know in Paris that, in fact, some of the police and fire officials have joined the protesters at this point. You know, if you look at the historical context here, I don't know if you want to go back to 1789 to the actual French Revolution, to the Paris Commune in 1871, or to Paris in 1968, and we're talking. These have always been really important in revolutionary history in the world. The terms like right and left, for example, applied to politics come out of the French Revolution of 1789. The historical context has always revolved around class issues, create these divisions, that basically the society is not providing for large sectors of the population who are being more and more immiserated, that produces these outcomes. Now, the particular thing here with the pensions is only, one of a number of things that have happened over the last 40 years, with the pauperization of working people across Europe, with the austerity and the removal of the safety nets, etc. Looking across the globe, for example, Russia and China, those two horrible places for people to live, the retirement age is 55 for women and 60 for men. Somehow they managed to provide that. Here in the United States, even, I took retirement on Social Security age 62. French people have had, certainly since the 70s, a halfway decent and comparable situation, and it's one of the last things that have remained out of the, various things that were fought for and won over the last 150, 200 years. Macron is now taking that away. And the fact that it's happening in his second term and he's bypassing the legislature to do it should be a lesson to people looking at a second term for Joe Biden here in the United States, by the way.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Traore, Celia Belain, who runs the Paris office of the European Council on Foreign Relations, which is a think tank, says that there is a feeling that the president is not listening to his people at this moment, and the political legitimacy of Macron's second mandate is being called into question. What is your opinion?
Yes, I think this is perfectly right, but I think this is not new. There's nothing new in it. We know that President Macron never listened to the people. We saw it with the Yellow Vest movements 3 or 4 years ago, just before the COVID-19 crisis. So it is not something new. We know that he's and this is why he was elected. This is why some decided to have him in power. They prepared him as a candidate because they knew that with him, he was the only person who could, let's say, shape the French nation as they wanted to. And this is now, now we've got to, but it is something that the French people also accepted. They had the choice. They had the choice, even if many people say they did not have the choice. It was between Marine Le Pen and him. When I say he had the choice, I mean that there was a first round of the presidential elections. In the French presidential election, there was a first round. They did not pick up the right candidates. So now they have to accept it.
So, Mr. Debar, you did, of course, mention that Macron has been lecturing here and there other countries regarding the issue of human rights. Now, France itself is actually using excessive force against these protesters who are mainly peaceful protesters. There are not that many reports of violence as far as the protests are concerned. And this actually raises a lot of question marks here, especially when we go back just a couple of months when Macron even held a meeting with people who were supporting the riots in Iran. He actually held a meeting, an official meeting with these people who have no legitimacy and do not represent any Iranian group or party or political faction or any kind of group, as you can say. What is your opinion regarding that?
Yeah, there was no mass constituency for that at all. This is clear. You have these attempted color revolutions that take place from time to time. You had a pair of them in Iran. I think it was 2009 was the earlier one. We had one in 5 years ago, for example, in Nicaragua, There was an attempted one there. There was one in Cuba over the last few years. And let's go back to the image of John McCain and Victoria Nuland and a host of other actual American government officials standing in front of a mob that was killing police officers and burning down buildings and exhorting them on to further, actually, ultimately to overthrowing the government, with the demands from the outside that those people respect the rights of the protesters. This, Macron was one of those voices, and the members of his party, Sarkozy and others over the whatever period you want to talk about. Let's talk also about what happened in Libya and what they tried to do in Syria. Well, this is something that's a common problem. And then finally, all right, in May of 2018, I marched with the Yellow Vests in Paris, and there were maybe 100,000 people that were out there. They've been mobilizing for years. Again, the context is a gradually intensifying over a period of almost 4.5 decades now, austerity and increasing poverty and powerlessness that's been exacerbated over the last year and a half, by the way, by the consequences of a war in Ukraine that has both austerity because of the need to fund NATO and buy weapons and such, but also the fallout in terms of inflation and fuel prices and fertilizers and food and everything else. The people on the ground are hurting, and their governments are not responding. And what happened? Basically when the powers who are governing can no longer govern in the old ways, and the people will not be governed in the old ways, they call that a revolutionary condition. And I'm looking at the history of France, and I'm looking at the fact that there was a problem over the condition of the people in 1789. There was a problem with the way that the military felt they were being treated in 1871. And then you had an illegal war in Vietnam that was being protested, and the response against protesters in 1968. You have all of those things operating now, and not much room to blow air back into the system. So this could be really catch fire. And these conditions exist across Europe now as well.
And do you believe that from now on, Macron can actually ever talk about democracy, ever, particularly on the international scale?
Well, not credibly. When people have no shame, they'll do anything, okay? And, the Western political class has demonstrated over and over that they have no shame. But I don't know who would accept a lecture from him. Certainly no one in China, Russia, and by the way, now Saudi Arabia as well, and around the world. The territory that exists for the exclusion zone for the United States to banish people from has shrunken almost to the size of the United States at this point. There's a new world being born. It's actually being midwifed by the United States by forcing the rest of the world to do this.
Well, we will get back to that new world order that you just pointed out, but let's ask this question from Mr. Traore now. Macron's legitimacy outside France is suffering as well. Our other guest from New York, Mr. Don Debar, did point to a few issues. And also on Friday, a long-planned state visit to France by Britain's King Charles III was also postponed.
Yes, of course. And I think it is a good thing for some African countries who are trying to emancipate themselves from the chains of France. Like I'm thinking here of countries like Mali and Burkina Faso, because now Macron is in a weaker position. France won't be able to lecture them on some issues in Mali. So I think this is a good point for the emancipation of some African countries. So in fact, what I think is that maybe Macron was a good president for the Africans, because during his presidency that many countries African countries have the possibility to set free from the French chains. So that's the positive thing maybe.
Mr. Traore, Macron himself claims that this was the ground of why he was re-elected. How do you think Macron will go down in history?
He will be seen as a liberal. and he came to shape France. He was the only candidate who was able to do it, to stand the pressure of the people, and this is why he was elected. I think that when you look at the French society, if you want to have an idea about what the French society is going to be like in 10 years or 20 years' time, you just have to look at the United States or Britain. Very liberal. And there's no way we can escape this one. I know it's not good, but there's no way we can escape this one. And the disappointing thing is that it seems that the French people have not realized it. If they had realized it earlier, they would have been better prepared. But now I think it's too late. I think the time to change things was when they had the Yellow Vest movement. It seems that this organization was not really respected. It was maybe because of the media as well. But the thing is that they missed the train.
So, Mr. Don Debar, I would also like to have your response to this question as well, particularly in the light of what you just mentioned as a new world order emerging. How do you think France will be remembered in this new world order where the Western countries, Europe and the United States in particular, do not have the final say anymore?
Well, people are beginning to speak. I've noticed this over the last month or so. Not just about the rise of the multipolar world and the new order, but they're looking also at the close of the colonial period that's lasted about 500 years, centered in Europe and the last 100 years or so also in North America. From that context, you're looking again at sort of losing the domination of Western political thinking. I had mentioned earlier at the French Revolution the terms left and right, for example, first were applied to politics. Members of the National Assembly that sat to the left of the presiding chair of this assembly were the opponents of the supporters of the revolution, opponents of the king, and the king's supporters sat to the right. People have been grappling with the question of right and left right now since the fall of the Soviet Union, but particularly in the last couple of years, because so many of the issues that were identified with one side or the other in Western politics don't fit the current conditions. You have people that are against globalization and for example, war on Russia and China. Many of them identify as being of the right. And those who are opposed to, the global corporate economic behemoth also do so, many of them from a perspective almost of Adam Smith rather than the various interpretations of Karl Marx. And so the whole period seems to be coming to an end, and a new world born, not just multipolar with respect to the traditional last period since World War II, but also truly post-colonial, where the centers of power rest with the people on the ground globally.
So, Mr. Traore, back to the issue of this whole pension reforms bill. You're still waiting in France for the Constitutional Council to pass this bill before it becomes law. How do you expect this to unfold?
I think that is going to pass for me. I do not see I do not see it being rejected. So this is So I think that for me it's nice to demonstrate. It's not nice to protest, but I'm very skeptical about what is going to happen next. I think that it's too late. It's too late, unfortunately, and it is his second mandate. He's got no reason to step back. There's no reason for Macron to. He's got nothing to lose. So this is what we have to understand. The protest and the reason why people are demonstrating is just for it not to happen again. But this time it is too late. And I think that in a few weeks' time you will have people who are going to, because business has to go on. Okay, you work, and if you do not work, you won't be paid. You have lots of people who are employees. Some have their businesses. So I do not see it is too late. There's nothing we can do. It is past now. We have to be very vigilant for next time, because we know that today we have 2 years added to the retirement age, but we know that maybe in 5 years' time we might have 1 more year and 1 more year. Like people of my generation, I know that by the time I get to 67, the law will change and they will ask me to go to 70 years old to retire. We all know this. Okay, so now they have to demonstrate, they have to protest, and they have to be more vigilant. Okay, and not get lost in fake debates, as it was the case in the previous elections. In fact, if you look at these last 10 years, in all elections, we had fake debates about immigration, headscarf. No, these are not the real issue. The real issues was retirement. What do you want for France as a nation? Okay, so yeah, so this is one fact. It is very sad, but I think the first people to blame are the French people. The French, those who voted, they had the choice. They had the choice between Mélenchon. Okay, no, they did not vote for Mélenchon. Okay, so now they have to accept it.
So, Mr. Debar, Mr. Traore did mention that Macron is at a point now where he really doesn't have much to lose. This is something that we've heard from a lot of pundits over the past couple of days. But as you mentioned so yourself, Macron does have a lot to lose still. He has France to lose, and of course the reputation of France as an advocate of democracy. So how do you think this will go down? How much do you agree with Mr. Traore in order to wrap this up?
I would have a different focus. I think what we're seeing is the growing irrelevance of the existing political structures to the lives of the people that live in France and elsewhere. And I think that what we're talking about here is a fundamental decision about allocation of resources inside the society, how much of it is going to be set aside for the people that produce the value, the working people. I don't think they have any more room to give in terms of not having anything to lose. We're talking about from Macron, his political career. For most people in France, in Paris, they're identifying with it, for example, they're talking about the very survival. You know, this past winter, there was the question of whether or not to have fuel or food. If it's going to go up again another year or two, this and that, et cetera, things are going to get more intensive. You know, they become starker and starker choices. And there comes a point in time when the people decide that their own survival is more important than the forms of the existing government, and they toss it over. And the French have a tradition of doing that, and I think we're looking at the beginning of that now. And
do you agree with that, Mr. Traore? A quick response.
Yeah, I think that in terms of reputation, Macron does not care, and I think that this is the way the world goes. You know, if you look at every country, is the same. Britain is the same. It is the decline of the West. This is what we have to admit. And there is a new order that is coming to life. And this is what we see. So the American society, the British society, the French society, all the West is, for me, is about to collapse. And we are in it right now, and we have to accept it. There's a new order coming, and things are going to be different.
Things are going to be different, and Mr. Don Debar also agrees, I assume. We don't have much time left. Thank you very much to both of you gentlemen. Moustafa Traore, academic and political commentator from Paris, and Mr. Don Debar, activist and commentator from New York. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and views on this edition of The Spotlight. And thanks to all of you viewers for watching this edition.